To help set the scene, you have led AI projects at a serious scale in Europe, where you support tens of millions of end customers across major brands. What battle scars do you have from leading some of Europe's largest AI implementations?
Great question, Billy. And thanks for the question. So I think probably the main thing on AI projects is get comfortable being uncomfortable. So AI had its breakout year in 2022, where it made it into the public mainstream through release of ChatGPT and the other large language models. As we know, AI has been around since the 1950s. One of the largest projects I worked on was setting up the Applied Science Lab at Lloyds Banking Group, which was central to our £3 billion transformation that we were undertaking at the time. Lloyds, central to the economy in the UK, had a bold, bright ambition of where it wanted to take the bank and really to turn it into the UK's largest fintech. And we saw AI being central to that. And so being engaged on that project, I have to say, for the first year, I felt absolutely daft going home every day. And actually what I realized is that's a good sign, because you are experimenting at the edge of what can be achieved.
Yeah. And so back then, what was your approach to actually utilizing AI and technology to support the new commercial objectives? Were you leading with the tech, or was it more the business problems?
Both. So my mantra would remain the same, actually. So my mantra for any AI project, big or small, would be think big, shift left, start small and move fast. So what I mean by that, on the think big aspect of it, every business has got somebody or a group of people in the business talking about the potential of AI. From what I learned back then and from what I see now, there are still very few businesses that are really thinking about long term, what do we want the outcomes to be? What is the potential of this technology? Do we have a long-term architecture for the business that the board gets and is behind? And to work back from that sequentially. I think the challenge in a lot of businesses today is they're getting so far on point level experiments, but then they're finding we've got 100 or more different experiments. How do we stitch it all together? And that's driving a lot of unexpected costs. So think big is really about understanding the long-term potential. Shift left is about thinking through up front in the design of what you do, how you're going to keep it safe, because that's often a barrier when you get to execution. And then start really small, but with a view on the long term, and move fast in what you do. And get comfortable being uncomfortable, means being prepared to accept failure, be prepared to experiment, follow a hypothesis, see it not work, regroup and try again. And I think the more businesses allow their teams to do that, to experiment and fail, and to introduce a process where you're taking the learning from those experiments, ultimately the more successful that you're going to be. And there's some businesses that do some phenomenal things in allowing that culturally.
Yeah. So before we go into it and into the tech, the projects, can you take us on your career journey so far and where you're up to now?
So I'm James. So currently I am founder and CEO of a boutique advisory firm called Hudson Gray, and we work with boards in helping them to act on complex risks. So principally cybersecurity, AI safety, and we do a bit of work in geopolitics and counter fraud as well. But really our job is to help boards cut through the complexity and get to the things that are really going to shift the needle. So alongside that, I'm a non-exec director in a number of organizations, currently supporting UNICEF amongst others. I spent about 5 years on the board of Outsourcer, a financial services business, which we took from a valuation of about $1.5 billion to 4.8 over 4 years. So that was sold in 2023. And prior to that, I spent 7.5 years at Lloyds Banking Group, initially de-risking the bank, then moving into the team that grew the digital bank, and then latterly into transforming the bank. And then 2/3 of my career before that was in telecoms. So I started out in counter fraud. I became Orange Group's fraud director, and then moved into 3 to help it transform fraud and set up its first cybersecurity function.
Awesome. So, from reviewing what must have been more than 1,000 AI incidents, what patterns do you generally see and which risks are overstated?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the fear amongst the boardrooms at the moment is the speed at which the competitive moat will be eroded, and there is some truth to that. So I did some analysis on private equity and mid-market firms, and compared to 2022, businesses' competitive moats, so their competitive edge, is being eroded about 2.8 times faster than it was before AI broke out. So that's the thing that's front and center in the board conversations. It is a fear of, are we going to be outpaced, outmaneuvered by companies that have got a much more efficient and quicker model than we have? But actually looking at the things that have gone wrong, we took a look at more than 1,000 publicly disclosed AI failures, and there's 5 things that come through. So the number one, so 29% of all of those failures was, if I characterize it as, it worked in the lab, but it failed in the wild. So models that were built on specific training data or narrow pilots then got to scale, and then they stumble on real world variation, dealing with edge cases, or drift in the models that the builder had never anticipated. So that generalized failure accounts for most of them. Second biggest issue is the front door was locked, but the back door was left open. So unsafe exposure access. So about 20% of those public cases centered on leaks, weak controls, prompt injection, jailbreaks, all those good things. And that's an aspect that very few companies have the skills and capabilities to really think through and model. And AI is now something that has been actively used in cyber attacks, both defensively and offensively. And the third thing is lack of transparency. So if you can't see it, you can't fix it. So opaque systems that don't really allow the business and the humans in the loop to oversee them. Small errors that start to snowball and difficult to trace down to the root cause accounts for a number of those failures. And then final 2 is skew in, skew out. Classic one, bad data in, bad outcomes. So biased data in and mismatched in context produces a really uneven performance. And then the final is really a model that becomes confidently wrong at scale. So generative systems that fabricate plausible results and even lead into scams, defamation, dishonesty. The models just go wild. And out of all of that, those 1,000 cases, that's the top 5 things that we see.
Yeah. What's the most expensive AI failure you've seen?
Well, that's suspiciously something that companies are a little bit quiet about. Although I did work with a company last year, and the CIO called me, and they were using some predictive models on vast data sets for a particular use case. And he called me shocked to say, James, I don't know what's gone wrong, but I have got a £5 million overspend on my planned budget this month alone. And what had happened is the company had implemented a large language model and hadn't understood the cost modeling that goes with it. So the teams were embracing it, starting to get some good results. And that comes back to the point I made on skew in and skew out. So the businesses that are doing really well are the businesses that have got the foundations in place on their data. They've done the boring work, the hard work to get that into shape. And so a business we spoke to was working with an AI provider, and they looked at the data and they said, look, if you want to get to a 94% accuracy on what this model's doing, it's going to cost about 4 million. Okay, great. We want a higher degree of accuracy. Okay, if you want to get to 98% accuracy, it's going to cost you 40 million. And the reason for that is the weaker the data, the harder the model is going to have to work, which increases your cost.
And how did you overcome it?
Back to basics on the data.
Right.
Back to basics on the data. And that's probably the most important thing in an AI strategy, alongside trying to understand the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, is being really clear on the quality of your data and getting your data in order. It's not the sexy stuff, even the basics like data dictionaries, getting your data curated in the right place, tested. It's not the sexy side of the work, but it is the work that will serve as a really strong foundation for what your business does.
Well, we'll move on to offensive AI, defensive AI strategies later.
Mm-hmm.
I did actually tell the Gemini chatbot that James Allen, Major Chief Information Security Officer and Risk Officer, was joining the podcast. So,
and it went who?
No, it found you. It actually found you. So I asked it for some questions, inspiration. The first suggestion was actually quite interesting. It's classic, simple. It said, "What does a Chief Information Security Officer actually do?"
Mm-hmm. Okay, so CISO's role is, I think, one of the most challenging in businesses today. The narrative that we read in the newspapers, there is some truth. Naturally, there is some. Cyber is probably a bit like AI, overhyped and underhyped at the same time. But there is certainly a complexity to the threat landscape. There's been a significant increase in the volume of attacks taking place across businesses in the UK, in particular in the last year. Notably, over the last few months, we've had Marks and Spencers and Jaguar Land Rover. So that's put cyber back on the board agenda again, front and centre. The CISO's role really is to set the tone on cybersecurity. It's to set the strategy. It's to ensure that the business is understanding its risks, and its job is to execute a strategy that's going to keep a reasonable level of protection in place across that business. But that's a really hard thing to do, because you're dealing with people, you're dealing with process, you're dealing with technology. What I would say to most businesses when it comes to cyber is that they are often trying to do too many things. They're trying to do too much. So if we look at the cyber attacks that have been successful recently, actually it boils down to doing 10, 15 things in your business really, really well every day, and that is going to take care of 80 to 90% of your risk. So I think there's a slight challenge in the cyber industry at the moment, in that if a business is concerned about its cybersecurity, they are buying a product or a service that is delivering trust. It's helping that business to sleep a little bit better at night, so it doesn't have to worry about cyber. But actually, if you look at the marketing coming from the cyber industry, nearly all of it is designed to keep those same customers fearful, because if they don't buy the next product or service, their business is going to be unprotected. So there's an incongruence there. But yeah, in a nutshell, the CISO's job is to keep the business safe and secure.
Yeah. So how has that changed over the last few years?
It's changed a lot. So cyber really came to the fore in a much bigger way, what would be around 15 years ago now. So, before that, it was information security, or it was called technical fraud. And a few things changed. So if I look back to the early noughties, the thing that all businesses were worried about was fraud. And what had happened there is that there'd been a convergence between hacking groups and organised crime groups. So the traditional methods by which organised crime groups were making money were starting to become more expensive and difficult, because there was a much higher risk that you were going to get nicked. And those crime groups looked at hackers, which at the time were largely technical specialists. And a lot of the hacks was really just hacking gangs proving that they had technical expertise that was greater than the businesses. The organised crime rings looked at that and went, hang on a minute, and you're not making money from that. We need to get you guys on the payroll. So there was a convergence between those groups. And that's when fraud started to come much more to the fore. in the early noughties. That then moved on, so that not only were there organised crime groups getting involved in cybersecurity, it became part of national security strategy. So good and bad nation states started to get involved. And in addition to that, you had hacktivist groups, even terror groups that had their own cyber arms. So the threat landscape, as we talked about, has become much more complex. It's become much more international. And that's really when cyber came to the fore around 15 years ago. The strategies to deal with it have become ever more sophisticated. The technology used defensively and offensively has become much more sophisticated. But at its core, it is still about making sure your business does the right things, the next right thing every day, and does that well.
Yeah. So from a high level point of view, what's the difference between offensive cyber and defensive cyber?
Depends who you're asking, I guess, and depends who's behind it.
Is it specific technologies, or is it more of a strategy?
It's more of a strategy and a mindset, and who's using it for what purposes, I would say. So defensively, if we look at the sort of volume of attacks that are regular, let's pick a mid-tier business. I know that if you look at some of the network data, a mid-tier business may be dealing with anywhere up to around 30 billion suspicious indicators coming onto their network every month, of which from that there may be about 30 million indicators that suggest there is some reconnaissance or someone's trying to do something that's a bit more meaningful. And then from that, there will be any number of different specific attacks taking place against your business on a given day. Yeah. And that's why, getting the hygiene right in businesses, doing the basics brilliantly and doing those, basics brilliantly every day is a really important thing, because the hacking groups have only got to get lucky once.
So in terms of offensive cyber, defensive cyber, or even offensive AI, defensive AI, how is AI changing the threat landscape in its practical terms?
Yeah, I mean, it opens up. It introduces some new, I guess, what are called new vectors in the loop, ranging from AI being used much more extensively in reconnaissance by hacking groups. So when they profile your business, then when they look for weakness, AI is automating a lot of that for them. AI is assisting hacking groups in tools, techniques, and processes to disable, to penetrate businesses. But it, even practically day to day, just this week actually, the CEO of Darktrace, who was one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the world, her team were targeted by an AI deepfake using her voice. So she'd been, I think, in a board meeting, and she'd come out, and her team looked a bit white, and she said, "What's wrong?" And they said, "We just want to check, but we've been getting these voice messages from you. We just want to make sure that is actually what you want." And she said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been in that board meeting for the last few hours." So I think, I think, as is the case with what businesses are trying to achieve with AI in their own businesses, it's going to drive efficiency. It's going to augment humans, and I think another good framing for where AI is currently is if we think about machines doing the ordinary and humans doing the extraordinary, then in cybersecurity it's exactly the same. So the AI as a machine is doing a lot of the ordinary stuff, which means that human hacking groups can be a lot more efficient and effective in what they do. But that's also true for internal security teams as well. So AI's got some great practical potential in being applied to look at large data sets. So vulnerabilities is a really good example where managing vulnerabilities in a large modern business is a bit like whack-a-mole. You've got different vulnerabilities coming up every day, so the teams are constantly assessing them and figuring out where to patch and where to respond first. AI is fantastic are being able to apply a level of automation and intelligence to that, so that the teams, the experts in the business, can focus on what they do and what they do best. So it works both ways. Overall, I'm probably more excited about the opportunity for AI and cybersecurity than I am in many other places. And the reason for that is AI is fantastic, where you've got really large data sets on which to train it, and you've got really, really large data sets in cybersecurity. So there's some great potential.
Yeah. Are you able to really trust the AI technologies?
With the right guardrails.
Yeah.
So with the right guardrails. And I think, back to my mantra at the top of think big, shift left, and then start small and move fast. One of the things that we learned from doing some scaled AI implementations is that if you think about when you're designing an AI product or solution, you go from design to build to run, and then you start to do some of the assure elements of it. So you're kind of burning down the requirements as you build the product, and you're getting ready to go live. And what we could see is that a lot of the security and the compliance requirements were coming in towards the back end of that. And that was causing teams to retrofit requirements and ended up delaying the release of things. Also, not every security, compliance, regulatory requirement has been translated in a way that makes it practical to build into AI products. So actually, to spend the time building guardrails into the design of what you build, so that actually when you go live, it has all of the right security, privacy, testing, assurance has gone into it, will make you much, much quicker at the execution and give your board confidence that it's fit to go live. So yeah, that was a tension when doing very early experiments, because these were products that the business hadn't had to deal with before. So I worked on a project where the experiment was going to last less than 2 seconds. It was running some models on a big data set, but it was 6 months of governance to get that through. And so hence shift left, build security into the design, and it will help you go much, much faster.
Yeah. How do you tend to approach buy versus build when it comes to cybersecurity projects?
I think there's a little bit of both. I mean, certainly for if I think about a cybersecurity life cycle, and NIST is a really good one. So you start with identifying the things that you're trying to protect. You then work to protect them. You then make sure that you've got right levels of detection across your business to spot things, ensuring that you can respond to any attacks and then recover your business. In that middle bit of protect and detect, unquestionably, I would say it's largely a buy strategy, because the amount of R&D and research that's gone into developing those capabilities, unless you're a huge company and you want to go into that field, it's just not economically, it doesn't make sense to be building your own. But I think where the interesting things comes on the build side of things is often businesses will have multiple different product sets, multiple different data sets within their business, even though as much as they try and standardize. So actually some of the exciting things is how AI can augment and make the internal teams more efficient and effective in what they're doing. And there's some really big wins there. And that's allowing cyber teams at the edge that I'm seeing be super effective at what they're doing.
That makes a lot of sense. But for sort of smaller businesses out there, anything from a solo entrepreneur upwards to a few employees, how would they approach cybersecurity? Would they hire a fractional CISO, or are there tools and technologies that could actually support you, provide that framework?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and sadly, it is a thing that's missed by a lot of small businesses and solo entrepreneurs. I think, but if we look at the economy, I think it's like 98% of the economy is SMEs. Are they as much of a prized target for hacking rings? No, probably not, because that business is not going to be able to pay millions. But I know many small businesses that have been caught off guard, and have either lost data, or more importantly, if they're subject to a ransomware attack, they can't operate. And shockingly, about a month ago, we saw one of the first public ransomware attacks on a nursery group, a nursery small school group. And the ransom demand from the hackers was on the basis that they were going to release really sensitive information about children. So it just goes to show that you do need to do something about it. I think practically, actually, the strategy is not much different. It's just a smaller scale. So be really clear on what you've got in your business that's of value. Be really clear on the scope of your technology. Make sure you've got some reasonable protection in it. You probably want a third party, if you can afford it, to do some of the detection. But the critical thing is, if that worst day happens, is have a plan so you can respond to it really effectively. Many SMEs ignore it. The ones I see doing well tend to outsource all of their technology infrastructure to a small third party to manage on their behalf.
Yeah. And so when does an organization become big enough to employ their own head of security?
It depends on the profile of the business. Certainly, I'm seeing a greater use of fractional CISOs and vCISOs, as they've called. What I do think is the government has now done a really, really good job through the National Cybersecurity Centre on providing really clear guidance and frameworks that can be applied by small businesses through to large. And actually, if you look at what's being asked, back to the sort of do 10 things really well every day, there's some really good guidance. So if you're a small business, take a look at the National Cybersecurity Centre's advice, because there are tools and frameworks that you can use there for free. There's even an online assessment. And I think a good place to start is looking at the Cyber Essentials, which is a great government scheme.
Yeah. What if you're generally interested in cybersecurity? Say, for example, you want to be the next head of cybersecurity or CISO in the UK or even abroad. How do you get into that world?
So, look, there's lots of routes. So the good thing is nowadays there's a lot more structured pathways that create entry points into cybersecurity. Consultancy is a good place to start. A lot of people in cybersecurity start in managed services providers or start in the security operations center, because then that gives them the grounding in dealing with the day-to-day cyber threats and to move on from there. I think what I'd say is take an interest, and even if you don't have the experience, just start to connect with leaders in that space, and don't be afraid to ask for some help. So one business I worked with had a fantastic scheme because they were looking for 24/7 coverage, and they had a team of cyber mums and dads, so parents that weren't wanting to, nor could they work full time, but wanted to do shift work. Absolutely fantastic. They built a whole team and community around working parents, and it worked really, really well, because they were also, the parents were sort of self-managing on when they could work, when they couldn't, and it was a really great success.
Yeah. How about the junior engineers? If they were looking to move into the cybersecurity world, are there any core technologies or businesses they should be looking at to make sure they can actively progress up the ladder quite quickly?
No, I think. Look, I think cyber is a much bigger market than it was before. Since 2022, according to government data, there are 520 net new cybersecurity businesses in the UK alone. So the market's really, really grown. You've got a number of pathways, from being a technical specialist through to even working on cybersecurity awareness and communications. And there's a lot of innovation taking place in the UK as well. So there's an incredible business called Vivida that has built some incredible cyber awareness training that's built around immersive 3D experiences and things. They started out, a couple of them, much like this kind of business, where they were in production and thought that's a really complex problem, but actually it's all about human engagement. How can we support what the country's trying to do there? And they did it very well.
Yeah. And if you were designing the next gen AI and cybersecurity education program, what would be the core fundamental areas that everyone needs to research and learn?
Oh, that's a really good question.
I suppose, what are the modules within a cybersecurity education program?
It really varies. I think the most important thing in cybersecurity is helping people to understand the role that they play, because I think to your question earlier, in some form or another, I think it's in and around about 80% of cyber attacks still rely on human error at some point, whether it is social engineering and a help desk operator, IT help desk guy, being persuaded to reset a password, which actually is on an account the hackers have got control of, whether it is clicking phishing links. Then I think the human side of that, and that's true for AI as well. It's really about understanding the context, being able to cut through, make the complex simple, and I think good training should focus on practically what can people do as well.
Yeah, and looking through the cybersecurity lens, what hard-won lessons should boards hear before they greenlight the next AI program?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, I think a few things. So one is, I think as a board, you should ask for a one truth page. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? What's the value at risk? What are the guardrails that we've got in place, and who's going to be accountable for this initiative? And whatever you do, don't forget the kill switch. And the final rule, don't forget the kill switch. So I think one of the things where we talked about some of the AI failures earlier, a lot of businesses will get overconfident, put an AI solution into production, and then they will forget their ability, or they will forget to how they revert to manual operations. So if that AI product fails, what's your backup? And if that AI product starts to go wrong, what's your kill switch? So if we think about how Uber and the airlines got caught off guard, so using AI in their pricing models, where there's a natural disaster and people are needing to get out of somewhere really, really quickly, what happened? Prices shot up, and it stopped people from being able to get out. They got a lot of negative press. So you've got to have some human in the loop and human on the loop, and know when to pull the kill switch.
Yeah. A lot of the tech leaders I speak to, and generally data leaders, cyber leaders, they really struggle gaining board investment for their programs. And even when they are as major as cybersecurity issues, they still find it difficult to have that conversation with the board and say, look, give us some extra money to help solve this problem or even prevent it. So how do you approach that generally, gaining investment from the board?
So I think again, you've got to think about the long-term potential and the outcomes. Every business has got a number of different people saying AI is the answer. AI is going to drive a ton of efficiency gains. I'm pretty sure actually that's had an effect on the jobs market and the hiring market, because a lot of businesses have been tempted this year to go, okay, let's see what we can do. Very few businesses are actually realizing those benefits. So I think, to secure board backing, particularly when time is tight, you've got to show the flow of funds, the cost of delay, be realistic in the benefits that it can deliver and that will be achieved. And I think, have a really clear business case, but but also a 90-day learning plan, and promise board demos, not decks. I mean, boards just get too many papers and decks. Actually, when you build things at pilot stage, bring the boards into the demos, actually getting them touching, feeling, making it real, it is really, really helpful for them. And actually, that to credit at Lloyd's, when the senior leaders and the board spent a lot of time with teams on the ground in labs, understanding what was being developed, understanding the potential in the business, almost getting involved in reverse mentoring. And that was really instrumental strategically. That was really instrumental. And what was brilliant to see is you would see a board member in a lab with relatively junior colleagues understanding what was being developed, and that board member would do the job that they paid for, which is they would be able to see the long-term potential of that technology really quickly, and they'd be able to give some really, really good solid guidance on, have you thought about this as part of your design? So that two-way conversation can be a real game changer, I think.
Yeah. How have you convinced leaders, like business leaders, that you should invest in cybersecurity programs when there's no actual physical risk? They can't see the risk. You're kind of predicting that there could be something, and it's more defensive.
So, I mean, firstly, I don't think ever putting in scare tactics works at all. But legitimately, it is a business risk, and it's a business risk that boards need to take seriously. What I like to do is to look not just at developing a strategy that allows the risks to be addressed, but security is often one of the constraints in the business. So if you want to do transformation really, really well, then one of the places that you should innovate is on the constraints. That's where you put your innovation focus. So let me give you a practical example. From banking and in telecoms, one of the constraints, in banking years ago was everyone had to carry around these security keypads to log into their account. It was a real barrier and a real friction and a real frustration in customers, and it was one of the things that was a barrier to more customers adopting digital banking, and particularly mobile banking, because no one remembered to carry around the keypad. So that was a classic example of, okay, you've got a security risk and you've got a constraint on the business. That's where to go to apply the innovation. And sure enough, we did that and came up with a really innovative solution that meant customers didn't need to use that keypad, but actually offered a much greater level of security through mobile. And sure enough, that was really instrumental in growing the digital bank really quickly. And so I think that's also to your question earlier on the CISO. A core part of the job, I think, of a CISO has got to be unlocking some of those innovation opportunities in the business, because that's really when the magic happens. Because it's not one or the other. You can do both.
Do you think we'll see any kind of AI CISO in the future?
Definitely. It's already happening. In fact, that's one of the things, particularly in regulated businesses, is an appetite to do much more with AI to allow much greater adoption across the colleague base. But there is a nervousness about what's the unintended consequences, what risks is that going to expose the business to. So it's really pleasing to see some quite innovative solutions now coming to market. There's one which is founded by a couple of former colleagues of mine called Vigilant AI Squared. And what they've done is built a solution that sits underneath the generative AI. It has all of your business's guardrails and policies built into it. And so it is acting a bit like a teammate for them. So it's kind of like having your own personal chief risk officer. And what it does is it makes sure that the way colleagues are using that technology is in line with what the business wants it to be, and it's safe and compliant. And if it looks like a colleague is, about to do something wrong, and I put some personal data up, then instead of, blocking it and reporting it, actually it intervenes and coaches the colleague to say, no, okay, that's not the right thing to do. So can we recommend? So what we've done is we've intervened a little bit there. We've stopped you taking that action, and now back to what it is you were doing before. And so that kind of support through technology, I think, is a great example.
Yeah, and beyond the hype, where else is AI delivering proper bankable value?
So I think there's 3 areas. So one, augmented services, so agent assist and knowledge search, and that is helping, particularly in the world of customer experience, to lift resolution and cut handling time. So that's a really big benefit. I had a really fun, quite long conversation with an AI agent the other day that was, I would be unable to decipher it from being on the phone with a human. It was really, really good, really professional.
Why was that?
Why was it?
Why did it seem so professional?
Probably because it was. Yeah, it knew exactly. It had a really human characteristic. It was empathetic. It took the time to listen. It took the time to replay its understanding of what my need was. It made really clear to me, I'm going to go away and I'm going to look for the answer for you on that. That's going to take me about half a minute. Please bear with me. It was just a really good experience. So great job there. I think the second area is developer and developer leverage. So coding copilots, test generation, that can really help to reduce cycle time and defects. That's really exciting. And the third area is fraud and controls. So again, where you've got big data sets where you're looking for a needle in a haystack, anomaly detection, automated evidence collection, improvement of risk outcomes, really great and very tangible benefits being delivered in those areas.
Yeah. How do you measure the value and ROI of AI?
Okay, so measuring the value of AI, I think much like you would in any other business case, actually. There's nothing special about AI. The simple practicality of it is it's going to cost this amount of money, and what are you going to get in return? Sometimes that is an efficiency gain, and that might be a cost out, or it might be you can achieve an outcome quicker than you would. It may be that you're able to achieve an uplift in revenue. It may be that you're able to achieve a reduction in capital cost. The business case is pretty much the same. I think what's really interesting is, if you think about some of the big numbers and the edge cases, so if you think about applying AI in the context of capital modeling in banking, banks have got some really tough conditions placed on them in terms of capital provisions. So if you've got a capital provision for, let's say, 220 million, and you can create a rigorous model that gives you a 10% benefit on that, that's 20 million back to your business to invest in other things. So yeah, in the same way as you would anything else. But that's where I think some projects are falling down, is that they're just not clear enough on what the business case is and the long-term benefits.
Yeah. Something that I've seen recently is the theme of AI strategy. Some companies are hiring their own heads of AI. Others think it's just hype. Others think it's genius. But for those in larger organizations, the corporates, thinking about how they communicate the value of AI, and particularly generative AI, or communicating that to those who don't really understand the technical aspects of it, how would you approach setting up some kind of enterprise AI strategy that communicates the value of Gen AI to both technical and non-technical consumers?
Yeah. So I think you've got to break it down. I think, again, think big, start small, move fast. But I think at a strategy level, that's the bit that not many businesses are getting right. So they will say that, they have a strategy for AI, usually that is a series of initiatives that they're going to undertake, but the benefits of those initiatives are perhaps less than clear. I think if you're going to get behind AI, you've got to be all in on AI. And that's one of the decisions I think you've got to make as a business. And that is really for the board and the exec to think about that long-term potential piece. Is it an interesting thing that, we're going to experiment on, that's going to do all those good things like augment our human workforce and make them more efficient and allow them to focus on the things that they enjoy doing the most? Or is this fundamental to the future of our business? And the answer is going to really depend on the nature of your business. So when many years ago we looked at that in a banking context, it looked at two axes. One was what was going to happen with the interest rates, which is where a bank makes its money, and what was the level of disruption that was taking place in the industry. And the conclusion of that was that interest rates were going to be lower for longer, and there was likely to be a really high rate of disruption taking place in the industry, including new challenges in fintech that would be cloud native, AI first, etc. So strategically, that said, no, this has got to be something that we back. It's got to be a strategic imperative, and if we're going to do it, we're going to be all in on it.
Yeah. And so what does that look like going into next year? All in on AI.
So whether to go all in on AI is the right thing, it will depend on your business. I think what I'm seeing is a couple of things. So I interviewed a load of boards and execs in the first quarter of this year, and the consistent narrative from businesses of 1 million to 40 billion was, by hook or by crook, we are going to get back to growth this year. We've had a tough few years navigating COVID, navigating difficult geopolitics, all sorts of things. So by hook or by crook, we're going to get back to growth. And nearly every business I spoke to said AI is going to be one of the key enablers that allows us to do that. Nearly a year on, that hasn't really happened in most of those businesses. And the reason for that is that I think they jumped to start small and move fast, but that's a point hadn't really thought through what the long-term strategy was. And the reason for that is they felt that AI was moving so quickly, they just needed to start by starting. And that's fine. But so I think now I'm seeing businesses having had at least a year of experimentation. In most of those businesses, they've got some really interesting experiments to put on slide decks and to engage colleagues with. But I think that focus on AI being part of growth and then not really happening, I think's had a really profound effect on the jobs market this year, because hiring slowed across sectors, whether it's entry level, whether it's an exec level. The encouraging thing I'm hearing is that from boards asking different questions, and from headhunters I know are saying, actually, I'm getting more companies now in Q4 putting time in my diary, and it's not just a coffee catch up, it's saying, actually, we need human leadership on this stuff. We haven't judged it correctly. So yes, we still want to get back to growth, but we're realizing that it's not the quick win that we thought it was going to be. So who do we turn to? Who do we ask that's got more scars than medals, has actually been there, done it, got some battle scars, and can really help us think through what we're doing in the long term?
So are we at a stage now where AI is being rolled out just for headlines and investor confidence?
Certainly. And it was really interesting actually to see, I think it was 2024, might have been 2023, when Klarna was looking at going to market it, and it released a press statement on what it had achieved by way of efficiencies. I don't know the business and the extent to which there was full substance underneath that. What I do know is at the time that really spooked investors, and investors started to move away from big outsourcing companies because they were worried, therefore, of okay, the threat to these businesses is imminent, and actually that hasn't really come through. Hasn't really come through at all. So yes, I think it's moving into a much more mature set of conversations. I think that's better. I think that, if we characterize it as really businesses starting to understand that machines are great at doing the ordinary, but they need humans, including human leadership, to do the extraordinary. Yeah, I think it's getting into a much more mature space. And what's also interesting, I think, this year is the cyber budgets historically have been pretty well protected. Yeah, they'd go through a level of challenge, but a board would say, okay, if that's the amount of money we need to protect our business, then that's what we need. I think this year I've seen those budget lines challenged by the need to find investment for AI. Sometimes some really, really, really big numbers on that. And actually they've failed to deliver the expected outcomes. There are a lot of businesses who've got Copilot and other forms, live, but is it really delivering much efficiency gain other than helping write emails and documents? No, it's not. So I think there's a much more considered approach coming through.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, many employees and people generally in the public are anxious about AI adoption, fearful it could replace their jobs. That's kind of what the media narrative is. What's your message to people who are fearful about AI introduction?
Yeah, I wouldn't be. Or my hope, anyway, in good businesses is that AI will help humans to do more of the things that they love, right? In every job, there's always things that you don't really want to do, whether it's admin or whether it's other things. I think what's wonderful is that, AI can really help humans to take care of some of that. And to assist us. We use it extensively in my business. We've probably got AI to the level that it's doing the equivalent of 4 or 5 people administrative roles. But what that's doing is allowing the humans to focus on the things that humans are good at, which is being creative and being innovative. I think what I'd say to senior leaders is engage your teams and ask them. So the other thing businesses have a real challenge with is shadow AI, right? Everyone's using AI secretly, right? And, it's turning some good results in. But I think what's interesting is that employees are probably already using AI a lot more than business leaders would expect, whether that's in their personal lives or in professional lives. And certainly the younger generations coming through are doing some incredible things with AI. I had some great sessions with some early years colleagues and we were talking about AI adoption in the business and where to put it. And my goodness, I learned more in that hour of conversation with them than I'd learned in the preceding 3 months of reading stuff and listening to stuff. So yeah, we've got to work together on this. We've got to work together on it. No one person's got all the answers. And I think you should see it as exciting. Embrace it. Embrace it.
Yeah, certainly in Britain, you can feel that there's excitement towards AI. You can see it in the headlines, the media. I don't know if there's pressure there to actually build it yet, but I can at least feel a sense of change. Like you said, a lot more businesses are looking to invest in AI. I've noticed that this quarter as well.
Yeah,
it's definitely louder in the US, and a few of the leaders I've spoken to there this year have put AI everywhere, and they are properly innovating across the board. So it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's I mean, just in our own teeny tiny little business, a year ago we were putting out in some of our creds decks and marketing collateral how we were using AI, and it was AI augmented. And interestingly, a year ago that was getting oh wow, that's really interesting. And what's the benefit to me? Well, actually, the benefit to you, client, is we can bring you really high quality products and services at a price point that's much more effective. Okay, great, I like that. A year on, if there is reference to that in our cred deck, it goes the other way because everybody is doing AI something. So there's varying degrees of confidence and competence with it. I think to your point though, there is definitely an AI bubble in the market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you look at Britain's current AI ecosystem, from government legislation to enterprise readiness, are we genuinely gearing up for a new industrial revolution, an AI revolution? Or are we just tinkering at the edges while the other players like the US and China steer away?
Well, we're kind of sitting on the fence a bit, I feel. So, in the US and in China, they're just going big, The US is just seeing it as a powerful vehicle for growth. That China is doing the same, but actually, part of the reason for that is not just the economy. It's significant to national strategy and national security. You want to be the leader in AI, and there's a lot of IP associated with that. In the UK, I think we're sitting on the fence a little bit. Europe's gone first on applying much more stringent regulations than we have. I think might be a bit early in that. I think we've probably found the right balance in that space. I think the thing that we're still not getting our heads around in the UK is the need to invest in the infrastructure. In the infrastructure in the UK, in our data center infrastructures, in our network infrastructures, our energy infrastructures, and then the skills that we need for the future as well. So that's where if I were in government, which I'm not and have no appetite to be, but I'd be really thinking about our 25-year strategy for the UK to be a leader in this space.
Yeah, we've heard about NVIDIA and BlackRock investing in the UK for data centers production, chip production.
Yep.
So it's moving in the right direction.
It is.
But then again, those are US firms who are already way ahead of anything we're producing here. So I'm not worried about it at all, because generally we have a solid foundation in the background and a really rich, ecosystem economy. So we'll just have to see how it plays out, especially from a consumer point of view and some of the products. I think we could leverage some of the American technologies and build our own products.
Yeah.
We'll just have to see how it plays out.
And two very different strategies between the US and China. US is taking a very capital investment, business first approach. China has got some interesting headlines around the speed at which they're developing models, but where China's placing its bets is on the infrastructure and ecosystem underneath, as the enabler for the country to be successful.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the projects you were working on internally, Hudson Gray, some of the AI agentic projects. Can you tell me more about Hudson Gray generally?
Yep.
And what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so really simple. We help boards to act on complex risks. Mainly that's cybersecurity, but we also cover AI safety. We cover geopolitics, and we cover things like counter fraud. So really, we work with boards to help make the complex simple, practical, and actionable. Most of the businesses that we work with are boards and CEOs in FTSE listed, regulated, mid-market businesses. We don't sell big, long consulting projects and multi-year horizon transformations. Most of our engagements actually are 2 weeks. So we get in, we look at the business's strategy, where it needs to focus, and then we get out again. But typically we are called when the business has had a wake-up call, the board is frustrated with existing advice, or it's preparing for an event, be that an acquisition or an exit. It tends to be where we're called in.
Yeah. And now you have your own firm. Does your mindset change on kind of core cybersecurity AI principles? Has it tweaked it at all?
No, not at all. No, not at all. I mean, I think that, we use AI quite extensively in the business, predominantly in the areas of research, and in automation of some of our administrative capabilities and things. It takes work, it takes patience, but we have tested the models that we've developed quite extensively with leaders and experts in the industry. last year, I would say the work we were doing on board intelligence, be it on market, be it on cybersecurity, I could put that in front of a global CISO and say, what do you think? And they'd say, it's about 80%. We're probably at about 95% now on the work that's done through our AI models that we've developed.
Right. Okay. So what's in store next year for Hudson Gray?
So more of what we're doing. We're really early on in our journey. We've actually taken some advice this year, and the advice from a fantastic guy called Mark Palmer, who helps boutique advisories grow, former colleague, really encouraged me to be courageous in narrowing our value proposition and really owning a niche in the market. And so we've spent some time with his advice over the last few weeks and really narrowed it down. And actually the results of that are quite profound. So fantastic advice from Mark. Thank you. But yeah, that's our wheelhouse. We will go where we're needed. And I think it's a unique thing or a niche thing that we do. But it's wonderful to work with a client where they've been struggling with a big complex area of risk, particularly cybersecurity, and the board is worried, the exec worried, the CISO is having a hard time, and actually to be able to work with them over a couple of weeks and find a path that gets them really focused on the 3 to 5 things that are really going to move the needle in their favor. It starts to make magic happen. So it's great. We love what we do.
Yeah. And outside of security and AI, do you see any other major advancements within technology?
Yeah, I do actually. I think it'd be really interesting to see how it plays out. But for a number of years, cloud has been central. So most businesses have had a cloud-first strategy, and that was for reasons of, you're attached to a big R&D engine in, be it AWS or Microsoft or similar. But a lot of businesses were struggling to maintain their infrastructure. They were running more complex technology on it. It was creaking, or they had a lot of technical debt. So cloud was the solution. But cloud is getting expensive for running AI models on. So I think there's some really interesting things happening where I'm of the view that there is probably a slow decline and death of SaaS products. I think there is a move back to physical hardware. And NVIDIA, for example, are just about to release their first personal AI computers that allow large models to be run locally. I also spoke to another organization that is developing models so that they can be run locally on a mobile phone as well. So specifically, if you think about that in terms of some of the sensitive things that you maybe want some AI assistance on, like, I don't know, analyzing all your banking transaction data, you don't really want to be passing everything up into the cloud to be run across big, large language models publicly. You'd kind of like the privacy and security of doing that locally. And that places it, interestingly, I think, back towards much more of a hardware conversation. So that's quite an interesting shift. Yeah.
Are any of these in the news yet? Could we research them?
Yeah, I mean, NVIDIA's announcements on their new personal AI computers went out last week. I think the other thing that's happening as well from a resilience perspective, whether it's driven by geopolitics or cyber, is thinking about the design of your businesses overall for resilience and designing businesses and technology in a much more modular fashion. So for years, CIOs have had a strategy of dual running technology, being able to fail over safely, keeping the technology up and stable. Well, if you look at now, it's what's happening with cyber attacks. Actually, what that does is it replicates the problem. So that's a rethink from building a business that is fail safe to a business that is safe to fail. And that's a very different psychology. It's a very different architectural strategy. It's a very different mindset. So that, I think, as well, brings a much more local emphasis on what you're doing with your technology.
Awesome. And as we start to wrap up, what advice would you give the next generation of technology and cybersecurity leaders?
So great advice. So when you're early on in your career, don't be afraid to ask for help. And my advice at early stages of career, in fact, it doesn't change as you get older. Pick your boss and not your job. People leave bad bosses. They rarely leave jobs that they don't like. So if you can find the person that sees in you the things that you can't see in yourself and sponsors you and helps you to nurture those talents, that you will propel really, really quickly. But yeah, that's the best advice. And don't go for, particularly at the early stage of your career, pick your boss, not your job, and go for a job that allows you to develop knowledge over salary. Really tempting to go for the high salary, but actually if you look at the knowledge you can gain over a year, 2, 3 years, and you apply like a compound interest on that over time, that's where you're going to get fast growth in your career.
Yeah, but how do you qualify that?
What?
How do you qualify which business is going to be a long-term investment for you?
Trust your instincts and what they offer. Trust your instincts and what they offer. I mean, for nowadays, I mean, congrats if you manage to get past the AI applicant tracking systems and actually into an interview. But actually, that's true. I spoke to my friend's son and daughter who were scratching their head. You know, they're 25. They're like, well, we think our CV's okay. We're clicking apply on hundreds of different jobs, and we're not getting anything at all. And I said to them, right, well, go back to how we used to job hunt, which was basically hanging out in a room full of adults where we thought, you know, there might be someone interesting to meet. And sure enough, they went to a couple of events, I think 3 events at the Law Society, and they met people and they asked some questions and they asked for some help. And sure enough, humans like helping humans. So, you know, they're getting in through the front door. So if you're job searching, you know, don't lose heart. But, you know, go the extra mile, get out there, get into local business networking groups. Even if you're the youngest person in the room or the oldest person in the room, get out there, meet people. Because I think in this whole world where we're highly digitized, we're using a lot of AI, humans crave human connection and humans like helping other humans. So that's my best advice.
Yeah. The market's saturated online.
Yeah.
So sometimes it could be best going back to basics.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. You need a great headhunter.
You do.
Do you know any?
I might do. Yeah. Cool. Well, winding down, James, thank you again. For those listening and who would like to learn more about you and or Hudson Gray, what's the best way to reach out and follow your journey?
You can LinkedIn. So James Allen, my handle on LinkedIn is Hudson Gray, and we're at www.hudsongray.com. So yeah, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right. Pleasure. Thank you.